Hey, thank you for coming back to the How to Podcast series. I was a guest on someone else's show, which felt fun and a little weird to be in the passenger seat. But Will McPherson had me on, and we went on Rock Bottom, a podcast that he's creating, and he had me on as a guest. And it was really fun. Really, really cool to be on the answering end of questions, which was really, really fun. So here's the podcast I wanted to share with you and let you hear this episode and hear a little bit more about why I'm doing what I'm doing. And Will has some great questions. So we'll have links to his show and all that stuff in the show notes. But here you go. Here's my appearance on Will's podcast. I hope you enjoy it. Here it is.
Hello and welcome. My name is Will McPherson. I'm an urban planner, TEDx speaker, exciting new podcast host. And yes, you've hit rock bottom, building happiness and health into your life from the ground up. Introducing you to interesting people you will most likely not meet. One of the main things we're going to talk about today's podcast is how you can put more meaning into your life by broadcasting your message, your purpose to help others out. So to talk about that, my next guest is Dave Campbell. Dave's an interesting guy. He's got his post-grad in HR. He's got many years of experience in real estate. Dave is a progressive landlord, property manager, Habitat for Humanity contributor, upcycle specialist. Dave, you got to explain that one a little bit later. He's a career coach and a podcast launch expert located in Ontario, Canada, on the other side of Niagara Falls. And yes, Canadians are podcasters too. So Dave's got not one, not two, not three, not four. He's got actually 7 podcasts that he works with. Amazing. Dave is the owner of True Media Solutions. Basically what he does is he helps folks get their message out by starting podcasts. Dave, welcome to the show. After all the accolades given to you, and we head to the meat of the podcast, what is the actionable term upcycling that you do? What is upcycling?
Oh, I love it. What a great way to start, Will. Thank you for having me, first of all.
What do you think?
And
did I sum it up? Did I miss anything?
Oh, you did really well, by the way. I would
Great.
hire you just for that alone. That was great. Upcycle is simply, we're all familiar with the term recycle, where you take plastic and turn it into plastic, right? Mm-hmm. Upcycling is taking something somebody doesn't want, something broken, and turning it into something brand new, something different, and extending the length and the lifetime of something that's no longer of use. A piece of furniture, a musical instrument. What can we do to take this thing, keep it out of the landfill, and give it a new life? And that's what we do at Upcycle Canada.
That sounds really good. Now, is this a local movement, group? Is it a national movement, something that us in the lower 48 don't get? Or how big of a movement is it? So I love the term upcycling.
Yeah. So another one would be architectural salvage. Pretty familiar with that, where we save windows and doors and save history before it gets torn down and burned.
I'm a victim of that. I grew up in an old house in Elmhurst, Illinois. It's an original suburb in Chicago. And when I first moved in 1970, we had these 2 houses near the train tracks that looked like the Munsters. Remember the Munsters TV show? It looked like their house. Yep. They were demolished in the early 70s for these 4-banger condos. Horrible brown bricks, brown and yellow bricks, and they didn't save any of it. They just bulldozed, it was a crazy 70s. So they destroyed all the buildings and we lost our minds in the 70s. But right. Yes. Yeah. So it would have been cool to save those doors, cabinets, windows, and everything else. So that really sounds good. And Dave, man, it looks like you practice what you preach, right? So one day I was driving along and I was listening to a certain radio station in Chicago, and there was a segment on how COVID really brought out the disappointment that people had about not fulfilling their dreams in their careers. They work for 30 years in a certain career, laid off, or, they're thinking about retiring because, COVID is a great hastener, right? Is lime on everything. So, and they had nothing to show and nowhere to go. And people are depressed and they think it's too late to make a change towards their purpose and passion. So I guess first and foremost, right? What did you do to stem your career tide and why? How did you get into this?
So some people might identify with this. I've been handed that box with my stuff from my desk several times in the corporate world.
I can.
And that walk out to the car and that insecurity of not knowing what your next move is going to be. I think when you climb that corporate ladder and you put all your time and effort away from your family to grow your career, realizing that someone is holding that ladder down at the bottom. And at any point they can decide whether or not you need to stay on that ladder. You have no control in that sense. And for me, I started with a side hustle, which is Upcycle Canada, because I wanted to take a little bit of control over who was holding my ladder. And I wanted to do some stuff for myself. And so that was kind of the impetus for starting a side hustle, which then turned into being Upcycle Canada. So taking control. Taking control. Grab that ladder. Someone else is going to do it and they might let you down.
Well, how did you then segue, right, from Upcycle Canada to True Media? True Media True Media Corporation. What's the segue to that? How did that happen?
So True Media Solutions is the name of what I've been doing. What I have is I fell into having my own podcast network by accident in having 7 shows. My wife is questioning my thought pattern on having 7 different podcasts. But I've basically created my own little mini network. And because I have emails coming from 7 different directions, I needed to kind of compile them into one. So True Media Solutions is what I call my umbrella for my 7 shows. And it's a way for me to organize those. And now I can leverage my podcast against each other and help them support each other, grow a community across 7 different podcasts, and build community in 7 different directions at the same time.
So your podcasts do 2 things, right? They cooperate and they compete. They do 2 things with each other, cooperation and competition. I like that. What are those 7 shows about roughly? I mean, what's the gamut? What's the range?
So Upcycle Canada was the first one. It was to support our business. Then we talked Side Hustle. It's another one, Living My Side Hustle. Living the Next Chapter is a podcast for authors. That podcast is only 16 months old.
Okay.
230 episodes right now for that podcast in 16 months. And then we have Dad Space, which is a podcast for dads. I have a music podcast because I'm a musician of over 40 years.
What do you play?
Music. I play guitar, bass, drums, and piano.
I heard bass players get all the chicks. Is that true?
After you tear down, maybe.
Yeah. You start busting things up. Okay, so we're going from music. So that's 4. We got 3 more.
Yep. So then I have the Daily Santa podcast is when I created the most recent podcast, and that was around Christmas to inspire children to be great humans leading up to Christmas. 25 episodes in a row, daily up podcast, which I've never done before. That was really, really difficult and challenging. And then the last one would be number 7 would be the How to Podcast series, where I teach people how to get your message out there, kind of what we're talking about today.
That's the meat of it, Dave.
How do I go from a message that's burning inside of me that I know I can help somebody? How do I get past the tech and how do I get my word out there, get my message out there? And that's what I do is I help people with that.
So if you want to get a hold of Dave, do truemediasolutions.ca. Yes, the CA doesn't stand for California, which I originally thought it does. It stands for Canada.
There you go.
Right? So if you want to get a hold of Dave, is that the best way to get a hold of you?
That is the best way. And all the podcasts are listed on that website. So you can find them all right there.
Awesome. All right. So listen, let's talk about someone who is, like super young. Like I said, boy, if you can get somebody young and do their purpose and passion before they hit the corporate grinder, that would be great. But there's a lot of us I was talking about, right, that are midlifers, mid-career people that are unfulfilled, unsatisfied, right? You're doing it just for the money. And for some people, it's good. They're motivated by money, just money, working for tech firms, or whatever. But a lot of us aren't, besides the income, we're looking for satisfaction, where we're making a difference. So, one good way to do that, I think, is to, we've all got a message, right? We've all know something that each other doesn't. That's the one thing about, when you come to somebody, they know stuff you don't know. And I don't care who they are and how you judge them. That's the deal. So how does one start a podcast? I mean, what do you do? What's the first thing you should do before anything else?
I think some things people fall into a trap. They buy all the equipment and then they try to figure out what they're going to talk about. So I would say the first thing is before you spend a penny is figure out what you want to talk about. What can you talk about? What is that one thing that lights you up? That when you
I
start
see.
talking, your partner, your kids roll their eyes like, oh
Yes,
gosh, there they go again. That is the thing that you're passionate
that's the
about.
thing.
That's when you don't have to worry about content because you eat, breathe, live it every day. That's your thing. You might be a Star Wars fan and you know every second of the movie and every actor and everything about the show.
Yes.
You would be great for starting a podcast just about that because it's something you live, breathe, and love. That's the first step. Find out what you love.
Yes, find out what you love, right? And then don't buy a lot of equipment. Some people advise you just to start your podcast on your iPhone or Android. Start it up there and work from there. Don't invest a lot of money. That's really good advice. And a lot of people think, if you find your purpose and passion, then do you hone it down to a small niche audience, or do you want to get it as wide as possible? What's your advice for that?
When every time I go to Netflix and I want to watch something,
Mm-hmm.
Netflix knows me and recommends things to me that I might want to watch. So that based on my viewing history, they get to know me, and they know that I'm not going to be in broad categories, that I like certain things. So
Mm-hmm.
if we take a cue from Netflix, we want to have something that's narrow enough that people feel included, but not so narrow that you exclude everybody. So I would say, yes, focus in on a community that you can build a relationship with. But then on the opposite side, there's people that have a podcast about everything and they're doing great. So there's really no rules in
There's no
podcasting.
rules. Okay,
There's
that's
no
good to
rules,
know.
but you can really focus on the community that you want to build. I like focusing in a lot. Dad Space, I build a podcast for men,
Mm-hmm.
but 75% of my audience are female.
That's
So
strange. I
what do
never
you
would have
do there,
thought that.
right?
That's amazing. What's the deal? Are they trying to get the dirt on their husbands? What's going on with that? That
Or
sounds
or they
insidious almost.
or they find the podcast on their phone and they hand their phone to their husband, maybe. I'm not sure.
Here you go.
Listen to this
You
show
need
and
this,
get
dude.
better. So yeah.
Right. Okay. There's Dave, there's thousands and thousands and thousands of podcasts out there. I mean, are you going to be a grain of sand in the beach, or is it too late to start a podcast now?
Absolutely not. And I had somebody reach out to me and they said, Dave, I want to talk about this topic, but I see hundreds of podcasters talking about my topic. I don't know how I'm going to stand out and be unique. And my response to them was, you're unique. Who you are and what you know and your lived experience can't be duplicated by anyone else on this entire planet. So the uniqueness is you. And even though you're talking about a topic that other people are speaking about, they can't copy you because you're the only you. So the uniqueness lies in you as the host. And that's one thing you need to just focus in on and bring that to the microphone every time you hit record.
Hit record. Okay. Yeah. And I think one piece of advice that everyone told me, right, is first thing you got to do, hit record. A lot of people, like I said, go out, buy the equipment, they do all these checklists and, worry about, but they never come around to hitting record. I think the average podcast dies after 7 episodes.
Right.
So what advice would you have someone to set themselves up for a good run, right? Just not kind of stop. And maybe that question can't be answered by you, but what stops people in their tracks from a beginning podcast?
Lack of content and a lack of practice.
Let's expand. That's good advice to people. So lack of content, lack of practice. So could you unpack that a little bit, I guess?
Yeah. So lack of content would simply be, I have enough stuff to talk about for one episode. And after that, I have no idea what I'm going to talk about. So if you can
Okay,
plan out, if you can plan out even like a year's worth of content, that would be awesome. Then you have 52 weeks. You have it written down on a calendar, and week 1, I talk about this. Week 2, I talk about this. You already have a plan. There's no lack of content there because you've thought it through. You planned it out. A year might be extreme. Let's talk a month, 2 months. Can you talk for 2 months on your topic? Great.
Can you do it, right? And I think a block at 10, right, is what maybe might be a good goal, right? So it'd be 2 months and a half, right, of podcast. Dave, do you recommend how many, what's your frequency in that? When you're first starting out, what do you recommend frequency of recording?
So weekly is nice because it builds in something like if you watch television back in the day, you'd have to watch TV when it came out. There was no recorders. And if you weren't there Thursday at 9 p.m., you didn't see the show. So everyone would build their calendar around the release of their favorite TV show. So frequency is kind of built into who we are. But now we're in a Netflix world and you can binge and listen to everything or
That's
watch everything at
everything's
once.
out the window. Yes. It
So
used to everything was weekly, right? Let's see the new show
yeah,
every Tuesday night. That's kind of out the window now. But I guess, right, Dave, that would depend on who your audience is.
right. So it goes down to what works for you. For me, I have podcasts that release weekly. I have podcasts that release every second week. I have some that do 3 a week. So I have some that are daily. So I'm playing in all the different aspects of podcasting just to see what works. But really what it comes down to is what works for you. You can do a podcast once a month, once every 2 months. There's no rules. There's nobody going to come and take your podcast away from you because you didn't follow A, B, or
We're
C.
taking this away from you. That's not going to happen. No. All right.
And to jump back to the other part too, Will, was the practice part. Part 2 of that was the practice. And if you can imagine a baseball player stepping up to the plate, they've never swung a bat. They've never practiced in the batting cages. They've never, ever, ever worn the uniform. They walk up. Do you expect them to hit a home run on the first pitch? Absolutely not. You have to practice. You have to go to practice. You have to swing a bat, get in the batting cages, get beamed in the head a few times. You got to learn how to swing that bat before you ever step up to the plate. And I think in podcasting, we feel that because I have an idea, I can hit record today and I can be on Apple in a few days. You can, but are you ready? Are you ready as a host to do that? You need to practice and get around there and listen to it. Give it to somebody you trust. Get feedback on your podcast before you release it to the world and say, I'm ready to step behind the mic. I have my content. I've done my homework. I've practiced and now I'm ready to go. So put some practice time in. It really helps.
Some of us don't have fear of public speaking. Some of us do. Some of us freeze up in front of the mic. Is there anything you could recommend to help somebody out who would freeze? They kind of, it's nerve-wracking. So what would you recommend as an exercise to help somebody out in that respect?
Try to talk to one person, just like we're doing right now, you and I together on this Zoom call. We are talking to each other. We're having a conversation with each other. I love having a photo of my listener that I imagine listening to my show off to the side of my screen, and I address them and I talk to them. That really works well. Yeah.
Your avatar.
Yeah, my avatar. Now, the other side of the avatar discussion you'll hear a lot in podcasting is where you make up a fake listener, who their attributes are, how much money they make, where they live, their all their history. What I like to do as a counter to that is I make a podcast that I would listen to. And if I would enjoy it, my community will come around it, enjoy the podcast, and then get to know me. And they're probably going to like me because they like the show that I make for myself. So it's the one time in podcasting where you can be completely selfish and just make the show that you're missing in your life and make it for you. Your community will find you and they will stick with you because they identify with you as the host.
That sounds good. It kind of brings me back to Seinfeld. It's a show about nothing, but it's a show about you. But it's a show about Seinfeld, right? But it's a show about nothing. But that sounds great. That sounds like really good advice. So, it's something that you would enjoy, not something that you think someone else would enjoy, but you enjoy. And then you have fun, right? Then people pick up on your energy and so on and so on and so on.
Right.
Dave, somebody who's listening to this, right, is thinking, well, yeah, it sounds great. I'd love to start my own podcast. They're going to go online. They're going to see these huge programs and we'll help you monetize this podcast and you can make this, and this. What about ads? It's too much information, right? It's too much information. So someone reaches out to Dave, right? How are you going to help them along, right? Because I guess that's why you're on the show, Dave. I think you would be good for someone just starting out, right? It wouldn't be overwhelming. I assume it's not a huge, expensive program to start, at least, right? So what would you tell someone who's just going out, to disseminate through this massive information that's on the internet, right? When you type in podcast in Google, you get 30,000 hits. You
Right.
you go to YouTube, right? And everybody talks about podcasts, but I mean, it's just so much information. Like, what would you tell them? Where to look and to avoid the noise? Where would you tell them to look? Yeah, go ahead.
Great question. So when you go out looking and doing a search on podcasting, you're going to get inundated by opinion, inundated by experts, people who do have shows and people who don't have shows that are going to steer you in one direction or another. My big suggestion for you is to find a coach. Find somebody that's in your corner.
Like you,
And
Dave,
for
right?
me, well, there you go. But even if it's
Yeah,
not me, and I'm
that's
happy
okay.
to do this,
Sure.
but find somebody that's going to be a coach. Now, I love music. I love music competition TV shows. There's one where you have people and they are called judges. And then there's another one where you have people that are called coaches.
Mhm.
On the one where we're talking about judges, and I think we can all understand that show is American Idol. You go on and people are not ready for prime time. They get up on stage and they're laughed off the stage into the crying into the arms of their relatives in the hallway with Ryan. And
Right.
then you have the voice where even if you're not ready, the coaches will turn their chair for you and they'll give you feedback on how you can improve, and they invite you back. No one leaves the stage crying in a huddled mass in the corner because they're not ready. So avoid the podcast judges that are out there, and I really want to put them out of business. That's my goal, because I don't think anyone should be judged for your microphone, for your intro, your outro, any of that.
I love my intros and outros.
You
So
should
come on,
be
Dave.
coached. You should be encouraged. You should be uplifted and supported. That's what you need as a podcast. A new podcaster, find that person that is there for you and wants to see you flourish.
Whether it be a mentor, somebody you work with. Dave, you and I actually, one thing to do besides coaching, in addition to that, is a group. We meet a meetup in this one group called the Mediacasters, right? And you kind of, it's a group of people who, some are very experienced like you, Dave, and some who are thinking about starting a show. So so you can get a lot of information from that as well. Would you agree with that?
It is amazing. I love Julie's group, and meeting you was a highlight for me. Can't wait for our next one to get back again and talk to more people. But to be in community with other people who think like you and are trying to grow a show or start a show, it's so safe to be able to ask those questions you feel awkward asking, and to have people who come around you and say, we got you, we'll support you. And talking to you today is a great example of that.
It's a non-judgmental community. Doesn't matter what you want to talk about. Everyone's very supportive because they just care that you're going to get your message out, right? They don't care so much what your message is, but how you can get it out. They're very accepting, and they help for sure on that. That sounds good. So if we could, one of my last questions is here, general checklist, right? Number one, find out what your passion is, right? What makes your kids, your relatives roll their eyes, right? When you talk. And for me, I just did a TEDx speech on the walkable environment, right? How it affects your health and wealth and your politics, and how communities were built before World War II. And my friends just kind of laughed because they rolled their eyes and shut this kid up. You know what I talk about, but so it was easy for me to do, and I helped that I got a master's degree in it, but it is a purpose of mine, as I'm very affected by, I live in a large metropolitan area called Chicago, and there's an old part to it, right? It's very centuriated blocks. A lot of it was built before World War II. A lot of it's walkable. It's a great city, but once you move outside the city, especially northwest suburbs that were built after World War II, and Chicago has a huge amount of Fortune 100 companies in it. So, you're driving out and there's a lot of money out there, but it's just strip mall after strip mall after strip mall. And, and people, when they live in these car-centric communities, they go from their car into their garage into their back door, and back door into the home. They never see their neighbors. And,
right.
I could go on and on. But that's something that's my purpose and passion. I guess Dave is kind of more, how shall we say, across the board. He's got several purposes, right? Music, fatherhood, helping kids out, right, to be the best that they can. I think which is huge, and it kind of goes into what I talk about as well. As if a kid is raised in a car-centric community, they're kind of shut off from the rest of the world. they're
Right.
Just play dates. Their parents drive them over. Mom is basically a Uber driver, and that's the way it works out. So Dave, how can I guess if people take we've been listening to your knowledge and what's your website again?
TrueMediaSolutions.ca.
What's the one thing you would like to know people out there about you, about getting their message out? What's one thing that Dave Campbell does that not a lot of people do? What's your what's the one thing I think your business or your differentiator from all the people out there? What's one thing that you think differentiates yourself?
My focus is one person at a time. And when I can see the light bulb go off for a new podcaster or a content creator that your voice matters and that you have a way to do that, and I can help you start. That's exactly why I started the How to Podcast series, is I do want to encourage people through bite-sized little lessons and then bringing co-hosts on that share their journey to show that anyone can do this. You have exactly what you need right now to start your show, and you are the most unique part of your podcast. So start today.
All right. My last question is, and I tend to do mine solo, right? Do you recommend having a co-host with you if you're nervous or sometimes you get tongue tied, hit vapor lock? Is it better to have somebody else with you?
Having co-hosts is great because you can share the load. One person can take care of social media, one can take care of the podcast. You can share the journey together. And for those moments where you're a little stuck, you can kind of go back and forth. I would suggest sharing a Google document, and then you both know where you are in the podcast, grow it together, and basically get your message out there. That's amazing.
That sounds really good. There was a lot of information on this. If who's ever listening to this, you've got a good checklist to start with. You've got a resource for you. If he can't help you out, he can point you in the right direction. If you don't have a budget, if you got a little bit of a budget, always a good time to start a podcast. All right. Well, I'd like to thank everybody for listening. And folks, just to let you know, you've hit rock bottom, building your health and happiness from the ground up. Thanks so much.
So thanks, Will, for having me on your show. If you want me to come on your podcast and talk, I would love to. Hit me up at howtopodcast.ca. See you next time.